Hello students, I am Dr. L.K. Das, Assistant Professor of Sociology at the Department of HSS, IIT Roorkee. Welcome to another lecture of the NPTEL course Power and Politics in Contemporary India, a Sociological View. In this lecture, we are going to discuss about state welfareism and welfareism in general, plus how improvement as an idea is significant in the way interventions are created and interventions are implemented. So in the previous lectures, we had discussed about Foucault and his ideas about governmentality, how governmentality as a framework created conditions for the shift from government to governance, in which uh, welfare was targeted. We also discussed about entrepreneurial citizens, in which each individual becomes an entrepreneur, which essentially means that they are left for their own well-being rather than the state mediating some of these the welfare measures. So let us start with that. Now when we look at targeted governance as a technique of statecraft, so now technique is something that is very crucial in Foucauldian understanding of governmentality, because now statecraft is not just about who is doing what kind of activities. Rather, it is also about the categorizing populations and also subpopulations or populations within populations for direct interventions. Now let me elaborate a little bit on this. The subcategorization of population takes place for various reasons. The reason could be based on age, the reason could be based on communal feelings, the reason could be on the basis of gender, or it could also be based in terms of region itself. So this is a very significant idea which can be revolutionary, as well as it can also be very regressive and reactionary. In terms of revolutionary, we have something called the system of reservation. Now when you have a system of reservation, that means you are very conscious about who is in what stage of development, and you are also looking at the history of that development. So for example, we have, or the government of India has created categorization like unreserved, EWS, OBC, SC and ST. Now when we talk about unreserved, so this is not general. Earlier it was called general category, but this is unreserved. That means anybody who is coming to a certain kind of category can become part of this unreserved. EWS is economically weaker sections, and they can be from the upper caste but economically weak. OBC are other backward classes. Most often than not, within the Varna category, within the Jati category, they happen to be the Shudras. Then you have SC, the history of untouchability, and ST in terms of culture, language and geography. So this is one form of categorization that the government of India did or follows. Now significantly, this is also a way through which a state is run. Now interestingly, the state is run through this. Why? Because it is historically accepted that the SC and the ST population, or the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe population, they have been historically marginalized. So they require certain special incentives to bring them at par with under the general category, upper caste, or anybody who has had a history of the various kind of interventions since the past somebody would say past 200 years, 300 years or 5000 years. Now OBC is a category that is also interesting because they are not castes, rather they are classes or backward classes. Now, when we call them backward classes, the definition of backward itself differs from place to place, from region to region, so on and so forth. So, as a technique of statecraft, the interventions are made through different agencies, through different categorizations. The second kind of categorization is the relationship between different kind of children. Now, all kind of children do not require every form of intervention. Similarly is the case with mothers. So, children, elderly, mothers, or even lactating mothers, they all become different categories, and each category become the what in Foucauldian language is called subpopulation, because they have deficiency, risk, and different kind of vulnerabilities and uncertainties in their lives. So, historically examples show these targeted programs preparing certain kind of deficient groups. Now, this is like a double-edged sword. The reason I am calling it a double-edged sword is because on the one hand, a category like SC and ST could be created for empowerment of these two categories. Similarly with OBC and EWS. But with the formation of the social economic categories, a form of culture could be created in which we are also justifying power asymmetries. It is also about who can be OBC, or particularly who can be OBC in the creamy layer and who can be OBC in the non-creamy layer. Now there is a discussion that there should be creamy layer among SCs and STs, because over the past 70-75 years that we have reservation system, the individuals, some families have become part of a so-called social and economic and political elite. If they are now at par, for example, the Chief Justice of India or the President of India or some IAS officers, IPS officers, college professors, or even other kind of bureaucrats, do they require further reservation? So why not put this kind of individuals or classes of people into the creamy layer? And that is the reason why I am calling it a double-edged sword. On the one side it can be revolutionary, on the other side it can be highly reactionary. Now the contradictions of improvement interventions, as a Foucauldian analysis, particularly by Moritz would argue, is that the will to improve could be highly parasitic in nature. It could be parasitic in nature. Why? Because what it does is that it hides the anti-politics machine. Now let me again elaborate on this. As I have been discussing, development is a highly contested and contextual matter. Contested matter because when somebody is speaking about development, probably they are speaking from their own standpoints and not from the standpoints of someone else. So, do we need development? If we need development, what kind of development do we require? So, in the previous class, I had discussed about Amartya Sen and how he described development as freedom. What kind of choices people have when there is development. Development is not just about economics. Development is not just about market interventions. Development is not just about what is happening in the market. Rather, what kind of choices people have, particularly people on the margins, what is the basket of choices they have, or the constellation of choices that they have in order to lead a decent life. So, when there is an improvement and interventions that are required for improvement, that also means that they frequently could produce unintended outcomes, creating new vulnerabilities or exacerbating existing inequalities. So what does this mean? It means that, for example, there is a road that is supposed to be created here. Before that, this was a hillside. Now, when it was a hillside, this is the kind of normal gradient that was there. So, if there is rainfall here, so water would gradually move downwards. Some amount of water would percolate down and then flow according to the gravity. And in case there are trees or plants or shrubs here, the water would move slowly. So in this case, you have underground aquifers as well as groundwater. Then just imagine, all of a sudden the people of the area, the government of the country or the government of the state or some NGO or their donors decide that there is a village over here, and these villages, the road that they are taking is not proper or it is too narrow. But this area could also be a very beautiful place, and this area could be developed as a tourist destination. Now, rather than using this road, which cannot be navigated by bigger buses or the trucks, or even you can say the bigger SUVs and cars, the government of that region decides that, okay, let us cut vertically and create a road here. Maybe let us say a 30-foot road. Now, when there was a natural gradient, there is flow of water, there is no landslide. Now, when you are doing this kind of 90-degree angle cuts, what happens to when there is rainfall? Yes, now you have a better road. A lot of people can move to this side, can visit this place, but rainfall is going to be there. Then this rainfall, without forest cover, without natural gradient, when it percolates down, it puts a lot of pressure in this area, and then this entire landmass would fall off, which we call as landslide. Now, this was a development intervention in order to increase access. Now, what needs to be done here? Now that this entire landmass has fallen over and blocked this road, so what you do is you bring in earth movers and clear off this so-called land or soil. Additionally, you are also clearing of this portion. That means you are making more areas for landslide, and this continues till this entire place becomes so weak that this village starts sliding off, and probably one day this entire region will become part of landslide zone. So this is what is called interventions for improvement, and these are the contradictions of interventions. Whenever there is a particular so-called scientific and rational intervention, then the first thing it does is that it stops asking political questions. Who took this decision to create those 90-degree vertical cuts? Who took the decision that a particular kind of particular width of road is required to visit that place? So this way, the will to improve is parasitic on the outcomes, or parasitic on what needs to be done and how something needs to be done. And all the questions that we just raised, or all the questions that are raised by political sociologists, become part of this movement towards anti-politics machine, because welfare projects mask power struggles behind development rationality. And this is not just in the global south, this happens throughout the world. And when this happens, then these contradictions keep appearing over and over again, and no political discussion takes place. So the moment somebody says, why did you cut it at 90-degree angles? What is the requirement for a 30-feet road or a 50-feet road? The argument would be, you are anti-development. You don't want development for these poor people. You don't want development for this marginalized areas and marginalized communities. So that is the starting point of anti-politics and anti-development narrative. You are not anti-development. Rather, you are questioning the very essence on which improvement-led interventions are being made. Who is benefiting out of this entire project? So the question of benefit, the question of capitalist development, or whether it is private-led capitalism or state-led capitalism, is significant here. So the Sadangi, in his work, defines four major phases of welfare discourses in India, and he is starting off with the period of independence, in which he calls the post-independent Indian state till mid-1970s as state developmentalist, state-led welfare. A little bit of this we had also discussed in the previous class, that Nehruvian developmentalism spoke about a development state in which the state thought, state believed, and ideologically justified that it is its prime duty to lead welfare or to bring welfare to the people of this country. So that is the reason why we have state-led development planning. And the problem that Sadange identifies here is that even though Nehruvian developmentalism was noteworthy, but this noteworthiness was restricted to organized sector workers. And as many scholars in development economics as well as development sociology have identified, even in the year 2025, this sector is not more than 7% of India's population. So, even at the height of Nehruvian populism or Nehruvian welfare state, this could not be more than 5% or 6%. Some scholars like Ian Breman have called this kind of workers working in the organized sector as labor aristocrats. Labor aristocrats because, like the aristocracy, they enjoy all forms of welfare. They get subsidized housing, subsidized water facilities, subsidized healthcare facilities, subsidized education, a proper and dignified pension, and a retirement benefit, and many other things that are attested to that. So, like the aristocrats of the medieval period, only a few people, only a certain families are able to enjoy it. And if you go to any place, most particularly people who are working in Delhi or people who are living in capital cities, you would see the kind of life they have. So this is, although that time it was about state-led transformation, even now when you go to places like Bangalore and Hyderabad, only the ones who are working in the organized sector have all those benefits, others do not. Close to 80% to 90% of India's workforce do not enjoy this. So public investment was also in infrastructure and industry over social sectors, assuming that growth would eventually reduce poverty, which did not happen. Mid-1970s to early 1990s looked at the failure of or partial success of the Nehruvian approach. So during this period it was targeted. So there was expansion of integrated rural development programs as well as public distribution systems. in which the poor people and Garibi Hatao kind of slogans were propagated, and particularly by the ex-Prime Minister of India Indira Gandhi, in which the poor people were identified, and the identification was very crucial in the way public distribution system or integrated rural development programs were associated. So you had something like Indira Awas Yojana, or through PDS people would get subsidized ration like rice, wheat, pulses, oil, kerosene, certain areas even clothes, as well as subsidized the soap bars, subsidized sugar, so on and so forth. So this way a certain category of people were identified who were required to be brought at par with other groups. And the problem that was there within this period was that when something becomes target oriented, when something becomes part of an ideology of the identifying poor, that means it's about bureaucratic manipulation and patronage based access to welfare schemes. So what does this mean? It means that now the bureaucrats, particularly bureaucrats who are at the level of panchayats or who are at the level of block offices, they are going to decide who can be part of certain welfare schemes or who cannot be part of certain welfare schemes. In other words, they are the Mai-Baps, and local state, through the local state, the actual state is identified. Now, the most interesting thing that happens in this kind of bureaucratic manipulation is that most of the poor people or most of the actual poor households, they are left out, because we must understand as students of political sociology is that politics, bureaucracy doesn't work outside the framework of society, and most often than not the poor and the marginalized also happen to be the people who were illiterate, people who were living on the margins of society. They could be the backward classes, they could be the scheduled castes, they could be scheduled tribes. So bureaucratic manipulation also led to massive levels of corruption, because what these bureaucrats try to do in cahoot with paternalistic upper caste as well as upper class groups is to siphon off as much of these benefits as possible. P. Sainath, whom we have discussed in the previous two classes, wrote this very beautiful and thought-provoking book called Everybody Loves a Good Drought. And he is discussing, particularly in the case of western part of the Odisha in the early 1990s, how the bureaucrats, how the more powerful and influential people in the rural areas and districts of these areas, they would wait for a drought to happen. Why? Because if there is drought or there are droughts, that means there would be flow of money or relief money from the state as well as from the central government. And when that happens, that everybody is going to benefit, everybody is going to have a share except the people who really require it. So that is the reason why even those targeted kind of poverty alleviation programs failed to a great extent. Now from the 1990s to early 2000, when you have neoliberal restructuring, it is about minimalist safety net, supporting market-led growth and fiscal discipline. So the targetedness of welfare regime now has started moving towards further targeting. So in other words, if during the first phase this safety net was this big, in the second phase it got narrower, during the neoliberal period it became even narrow, because now cost effectiveness and efficiency were given more importance than welfare mechanisms. At the same time, welfare was also about how donors are influencing it. So, somebody who is poor is not important, somebody who is dying of malaria is not important. Rather, somebody who doesn't have clean water becomes important all of a sudden. Somebody who is getting influenced by HIV/AIDS, they are getting more significant because the donors have identified that as a problem. And informalization of the labor force became even more significant. The labor aristocracy of Nehruvian period, their children were not able to participate in the what was called labor aristocracy or organized labor. Rather, they fall back to informal workforce. And because they fall back to the informal workforce, so they got out of the security coverage that was given to their parents and forefathers. So this way what we witness is that with each restructuring, the safety net is becoming smaller and smaller. Whereas the fourth phase is now an interesting period. Why? Because first there is target, but at the same time the targets are also leading to certain forms of state welfareism, and this kind of state welfareism were demanded by the people of this country, whether it was Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme of giving employment guarantee for 100 days, or right to education, or National Food Security Scheme, through which people should get some amount of money to spend, a decent level of education and food so that they don't starve. So this was also about creating a citizenship which is based on entitlement. So now entitlement is linked to something, a term called, which personally I feel to be very derogatory, which is beneficiary. Now when you create a citizen or you convert a citizen to a beneficiary, that means probably somebody is getting a few hundred rupees, which is very important for that household or for that individual, but you stop remaining as a citizen, because citizens have rights. Beneficiaries get something that is as doles. They are given something because the big people sitting in capital cities have decided that okay, let us give them something. It is not the responsibility of the state or the bureaucracy to give welfare for the population. Now this is a little contradictory, because here it contradicts the very essence on which a concept like governmentality was organized, because there the governmentality means that we see people, we see the state creating population, and this population has to be taken care of, so that through this mechanism they become part of a particular discourse and their bodies are subjected to certain kind of rules and regulations without them acknowledging it. Now entitlement leads to beneficiaries, and these beneficiaries are given certain kind of doles so that major players in the economy and in politics can do whatever they want to without any questioning from the people who are becoming beneficiaries. Because the fear is that if you mess with the apple cart, that means there would not be any apples for the beneficiaries, and on any given point of day these benefits can be withdrawn. So targeted governance has this significant problem. Targeted governance has a second problem, which is now in the digital age we have digital identification, means everything is determined by certain kind of algorithms, And algorithms mean that some individuals who were at the margins, whether it is social margin, political margin, economic margin, or regional margin, are governed by technocratic ideas of data driven decision making. That okay, in India 80% of its population require subsidized the rice, but we don't know who are these 80%. So let us get data on that, and this data driven is again done by bureaucrats. So a lot of scholars have identified and argued that many times the targeted population are again the ones who have everything at their disposal rather than the ones who really require it. Or now new forms of corruption have emerged, and these new forms of corruption are interesting because it is happening at the local level and surreptitiously, which is not coming on paper or being shown on data. So even in terms of direct benefit transfer, if 1 rupee has been transferred, probably 20 paisa of this is given to the bureaucrat, who is going to give the rest 80 paisa or 80 paise to the beneficiary. But this is not happening on paper. The entire 1 rupee is reaching the bank account of this individual. So new forms of corruption, new forms of bureaucratic efficiency were able to see through this mechanism. So this way the data that we have, it's also making the segments of the targeted audience, segments of targeted citizens and population. And this segmentation is creating further gaps between who is getting what and how they are getting it. So exclusion errors means that during COVID-19, only a certain group of people were given some kind of benefits, whereas others did not get it. So the difference between deserving poor and non-deserving poor, below poverty line and above poverty line. The below poverty line and above poverty line, the gap could be just a matter of 1000 rupees. And anybody who is above this poverty line with just one medical bill can drastically fall to below poverty line. So what we witness here in this kind of a discourse is that while some individuals sometimes they are getting benefited, but the political sociological questions of who is benefiting mostly is out of reach and out of question, because what we witness here is depoliticization of this entire developmental discourse. But in the Indian context, as many scholars including Dugriala and Kumar have proposed, is that what we need is something called progressive universalism, in which we need to have specific standardized data across categories so that we have limited number of categorizations and limited number of exclusion and inclusion mechanisms. Finally, we can say that the idea of governmentality needs to be interpreted through the idea of welfare and not just through the idea of who is a beneficiary and the categorization and identification of beneficiary as part of welfare state. Because once it is welfare state, that means you are a citizen. If it is the beneficiary state, that means you are a population and a beneficiary who has duties but no rights. So these are some of the references that I have quoted here. You can go through them, particularly Tanya Morelle's work, The Will to Improve, gives a very ethnographic approach to understand governmentality. Thank you.